Daf Yomi, tractate Bava Batra, page 136b, top of the page, with the words Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Lo kana lokeach, Reish Lakish Amar kana lokeach. The purchaser did not acquire the property, and Reish Lakish says the purchaser acquired the property. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lo kana lokeach, kinyan peirois, ki kinyan haguf dami. The Gemara explains their reasoning. Rabbi Yochanan says that the purchaser did not acquire the property because he holds that ownership of the rights to use an item and the profits it engenders is considered to be like ownership of the item itself. Even though the property itself did not belong to the father, it is as though the father owned the property because all of the produce belonged to him in practice. Therefore, the son's sale can take effect only after the father's death. If the son dies first, since he never attained ownership, his sale can never come to fruition. Reish Lakish Amar kana lokeach kinyan peirois lav ki kinyan haguf dami. And Reish Lakish says the purchaser acquired the property because he holds that ownership of the rights to use an item and the profits it engenders is not considered to be like ownership of the item itself. Therefore, the father's rights do not prevent the son who owns the property itself from selling it. And eventually the purchaser receives full rights to it. V'ha ipligu ba'chada zimna Itmar hamocher sadeu lepeirois Rabbi Yochanan Amar mevi v'koira Reish Lakish Amar mevi ve'eno koira. The Gemara asks, but didn't they already engage in a dispute concerning this issue one time? As it was stated, with regard to one who sells his field for just its produce, meaning that he retains ownership of the field itself and he sells the rights to all of its produce to someone else. Rabbi Yochanan says the purchaser brings first fruits from his field to the temple and recites the verses in the Torah associated with the bringing of the first fruits, in which he thanks God for the land that you, Lord, have given me. Deuteronomy 26:10. And Reish Lakish says the purchaser brings the first fruits, but he does not recite the verses since it's not his field. Rabbi Yochanan Amar mevi v'koire kasav kinyan peirois kinyan haguf dami. Reish Lakish Amar mevi ve'eno koire kinyan peirois lav kinyan haguf dami. The Gemara explains the reason behind the dispute. Rabbi Yochanan says he brings the first fruits and recites the verses because he maintains that ownership of the rights to use an item and the profits it engenders is considered to be like the ownership of the item itself. Even though the field itself does not belong to him, it is as if he acquired the field because of all the produce, because all of the produce belongs to him in practice. And Reish Lakish says that he brings the first fruits and does not recite the verses because he holds that ownership of the rights to use an item and the profits it engenders is not considered to be like the ownership of the item itself. Why was it necessary for them to engage in a dispute concerning this issue twice? Amar lach Rav Yochanan achal gav dimam lekinyan peiros kekinyan haguf dami hacha itzterech sal kadai techamina aba legabi barech v'leachayil kamash malam. The Gemara answers it was necessary for the dispute to be stated also in the context of one who sells his father's property and then dies. This is because Rabbi Yochanan could have said to you that although in general ownership of the rights to use an item and the profits it engenders is considered to be like the ownership of the item itself, here it was necessary to emphasize this principle because it might enter your mind to say that with regard to a father and a son, the father presumably waived his right in the property itself. Rabbi Yochanan teaches us that even in this case, the father's ownership of the rights to use an item and the profits it engenders is considered to be like the ownership of the item itself. Rabbi Shimon ben Laki shama afal gav dibam kinyan peiros lav kinyan aguf dami hachait tzrich. So kedai techamina kol legabi nafshe afilu b'makom brei nafshe adifale kamashma. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish could have said that although in general ownership of the rights to use an item and the profits it engenders is not considered to be like the ownership of the item itself, as one who sells the produce of his field retains full ownership of the land itself, here it was necessary to emphasize this principle, as it might enter your mind to say that in any sale concerning itself, even vis-a-vis his son, one grants preference to himself. Accordingly, if one grants the property itself to his son, reserving the rights to the produce for himself, he retains the rights to the property itself as well. Reish Lakish teaches us that he does not retain the rights to the property. Eis Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish Nechasi lecha Ve'acharecha yirash ploini Ve'acha yirash ploini Meis rishon kana sheni Meisheni kana shlishi. Rabbi Yochanan raised an objection to the opinion of Reish Lakish from a Batra to Sefta 8:4. If one states, my property will go to you after my death for your use during your lifetime and after you die, so and so will inherit the property, and after the one who inherits after you dies, so and so will inherit the property. In this case, when the first recipient dies, the second acquires it, and when the second dies, the third acquires it. Meis If the second dies during the lifetime of the first, the property returns after his death to the heirs of the first, and does not go to the third designated recipient, as his right was to inherit it from the second, who never received it. And if it is so, the ownership of the rights to use an item and the profits is not considered to be like ownership of the item itself, the Batra should have stated that the property returns to the heirs of the giver, and the first and second recipients received only the right to use the property and enjoy its profits during their lifetimes, after which it was designated to be transferred to others. Therefore, in a case where the transfer does not apply, the property should return to the possession of the one who owns the property itself, namely the giver and his heirs. Amar le Kvar Targman of Hoshaya Bebavel Achrecha Shani Chen Rami Rabba Barav Huno Kamederav Ve'amar Achrecha Shani. Reish Lakish said to him, Rav Hushai already interpreted in Babylonia that a case after you, meaning where the owner said to the recipient, after you die, so and so will inherit the property, is different, as the giver intended to grant full ownership of the property to the first recipient as well, including both the rights to the produce and the property itself. And Rabba Bar Huna also raised this contradiction before Rav, and Rav said in response, after you is different. The Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in another Batra that if the second designated recipient dies before the first, after the death of the first, the property returns to the heirs of the giver?